Welcome to This Explainer. Picture this, a sitting president, literally expelled from his own party, right there in the Oval Office, facing violent riots outside his window and pretty much rewriting the Constitution by sheer force of will. Today, we're diving into the absolute roller coaster that was John Tyler's presidency. He was completely unexpected, totally politically isolated, yet he somehow navigated this massive public uproar and ended up defining the very rules of presidential succession. We're talking constitutional loopholes, intense partisan warfare, and a guy who absolutely refused to back down. So let's just get right into it.
What happens when a president dies? Sounds like a pretty basic question, right? Well, believe it or not, the original U.S. Constitution didn't exactly spell it out. And that one little blank space, it plunged the country into an unprecedented constitutional crisis back in 1841, right after newly elected President William Henry Harrison suddenly died.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the Tyler precedent, then his massive break with the Whigs, followed by his domestic refuge. After that, we'll hit the impeachment attempts and executive privilege, then the battle over Texas annexation, and finally wrap up with the legacy of an outsider. Section 1. The Tyler precedent and the whole mess of presidential succession. So let's look at the immediate aftermath of Harrison's death. He was inaugurated on March 4, 1841. Just 31 days later, he passes away, which is still the shortest presidential term in American history. Up to this point, presidential succession was, frankly, just a theory. Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution was super vague. It said the duties would devolve on the vice president, but nobody really knew if that meant he became an acting president or the actual president. Well, John Tyler, he wasn't going to wait around for a debate. He packed up, rushed to Washington, took the presidential oath on April 6th, and moved right into a White House that was actually still draped in black mourning bunting. He wanted to settle the matter right then and there.
Now, Harrison's cabinet, led by Secretary of State Daniel Webster, had already gotten together and decided Tyler should basically just be a regent, an acting president governed by a majority vote of the cabinet. Tyler was absolutely floored by this. He laid down the law with this quote saying, "I can never consent to being dictated to as to what I shall or shall not do. I, as president, will be responsible for my administration." He essentially told them, look, you can either cooperate with me or you can resign. He boldly and unapologetically grabbed the reins of full executive power.
Moving on to Section 2, Breaking with the Whigs, and the story of a president expelled. Having secured the title, his accidency, which is what his critics sarcastically started calling him, almost immediately found himself at war with the exact same party that put him on the ticket in the first place. You see, the ideological divide here was massive. Tyler ran as a Whig alongside Harrison, sure, but his actual political roots were deeply Jacksonian. So while the big Whig party leader, Henry Clay, wanted to revive a national bank to centralize power and stabilize the economy, Tyler was a strict constructionist. He was all about states' rights and had literally spent his 25-year political career fighting against centralized banking. So when the Whigs passed their bank bill, Tyler stuck to his guns and shocked his party by vetoing it. And this kicked off a stubborn pattern of defiant vetoes over economic policies that would stretch well into 1842. And guys, the fallout was absolutely explosive. Tyler's veto sparked a level of fury nobody had really seen before. When the veto was announced in Congress, the gallery literally hissed at it. 2 days later, on August 18th, things got violent. Angry mobs descended on the White House, burning Tyler in effigy, chucking rocks, and even firing guns into the air. It was the very first time a sitting president faced violent protests from his own party. The political damage? Complete. His entire cabinet resigned en masse, except for Daniel Webster. And for the final blow, the Whig Party formally expelled Tyler while he was still sitting in the Oval Office. Just imagine that for a second, being the most powerful man in the country, but completely, utterly without a political home.
Which brings us to Section 3, the domestic refuge, finding a little quiet amidst the chaos. If we step away from the burning effigies on the lawn for a moment, we find a starkly different scene inside. While Tyler was fighting this bitter political war with Congress, First Lady Letitia Christian Tyler was managing their whole domestic life from an invalid's chair. She had suffered a paralyzing stroke back in 1839, before he even became vice president. This was a woman who used to run a massive Virginia plantation and raise 7 surviving children, but during the presidency, she was physically confined to her room. She actually found a lot of solace just knitting, keeping her Bible and prayer book close by. In the middle of all those intense political storms raging outside her door, Letitia's room became this peaceful, quiet retreat for the isolated president.
But because Letitia couldn't physically host White House events, the administration really needed some help. That's where Tyler's daughter-in-law, Priscilla Cooper Tyler, stepped up to the plate as the acting First Lady. She essentially took on all the official social duties, keeping the necessary public functions of the White House running smoothly, and supporting her father-in-law's isolated administration, while Letitia stayed in her private sanctuary until she sadly passed away in 1842.
All right, Section 4. Impeachment and executive privilege, or how Tyler defended the executive branch.
That sanctuary inside the White House didn't last long, though, because furious Whig lawmakers soon tried to kick Tyler out of office entirely. The hostility over his constant vetoes throughout 1842 finally hit a boiling point. By early 1843, Representative John Minor Botts, who was a bitter foe of Tyler's from Virginia, formally introduced 9 articles of impeachment. They threw everything at him. They accused him of shameless duplicity and lying to Congress. They claimed he usurped power by setting up executive commissions to investigate the New York Custom House without congressional approval. And crucially, they charged him with a high misdemeanor for withholding information, specifically because he flat-out refused to hand over documents they requested about those fraud investigations.
But Tyler didn't just roll over. He aggressively defended himself. And in doing so, he practically formalized the concept of executive privilege. He argued that his constitutional duty to faithfully execute the laws meant he had to conduct confidential investigations. He totally rejected the idea that just because the House demanded information, the president had to automatically hand it over. He insisted that certain communications were privileged, plain and simple, and Congress couldn't dictate how he handled them. This was a massive, game-changing assertion of the separation of powers. And honestly, it laid the exact groundwork for the executive privilege that modern presidents still use today. In the end, the House voted down the motion to investigate the charges, and Tyler survived by the skin of his teeth.
Moving to Section 5, the Texas annexation battle and Tyler's ultimate geopolitical goal.
So, despite surviving an impeachment threat and literally having zero party backing him, Tyler was absolutely determined to nail his ultimate geopolitical goal, annexing the Republic of Texas. But he hit a massive procedural brick wall. Normally, annexing territory requires a formal treaty, and that means you need a 2/3 majority vote in the Senate. Well, when Tyler submitted his treaty in 1844, the Senate shot it down overwhelmingly. So Tyler and his allies cooked up a highly controversial workaround. They pushed for annexation using a joint resolution. Why? Because a joint resolution only needs a simple majority vote in both the House and the Senate.
As you might guess, this maneuver sparked a totally fierce, highly partisan constitutional debate. Opponents were outraged, arguing that using a joint resolution was unconstitutionally bypassing the Senate's treaty-making powers. Plus, they argued you couldn't just admit an entirely foreign, sovereign state by a simple statute. Supporters, on the other hand, shot back claiming Texas had actually been part of the original Louisiana Purchase anyway, so it was already rightful U.S. territory. They also pointed to Vermont and North Carolina as precedents for admitting states without a treaty. But regardless of who had the better legal argument, the political momentum shifted hard after the 1844 election. The joint resolution passed, and Tyler eagerly signed it just days before he left office.
And finally, Section 6, Legacy of an Outsider, and how he shaped the modern presidency.
So, what's the big takeaway from a president who was basically a political island? Well, his obstinate power grab back in 1841, refusing to just be an acting president, it successfully paved the way for the future. Following Tyler's lead, 7 future vice presidents ended up taking office under the exact same precedent when presidents died. And it wasn't until 1967, way over a century later, that the 25th Amendment finally codified the Tyler precedent formally into the U.S. Constitution.
And this leaves us with a really fascinating final thought. When you look at his unapologetic vetoes, his creation of executive privilege to fight off impeachment, and his aggressive rule-bending push to annex Texas, you're left with a pretty wild paradox. Did an accidental, widely despised leader actually do more to build the all-powerful modern presidency than the Founding Fathers themselves? It is a complex legacy of defiance that absolutely forever changed the highest office in the land. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning history.